Broadcasting from Now Media Network's headquarters in Houston, this is Purple Politics, hosted by political expert and commentator Alina Gonzalez Dockery. Join us to discuss the most important issues affecting our nation with fresh, balanced, and objective discussion on the first bilingual media network in the United States. Purple Politics starts right now.
Hello, and for those of you that are in wonderful Florida, I hope you're staying dry. I am your hostess, Alina Gonzalez Dockery, and we are back on the campaign trail. Trump returns to the Capitol. So former President Donald Trump has made a significant return to Capitol Hill, marking his first visit since the January 6th riot. This visit comes amidst his campaign to rally Republican lawmakers and business leaders around his pro-tariff and anti-income tax agenda. His return also follows a recent Manhattan jury conviction of Trump on 34 felony counts related to his falsifying records to cover up a hush money payment. Trump's appearance aims to solidify the support within the GOP and present a united front despite his legal troubles, which many Republicans claim are politically motivated. A little bit of a tongue twister for me today. Trump's visits included meetings with House Republicans at the Capitol Hill Club, where he received a warm welcome. During this gathering, he proposed a radical idea of an all-tariff federal revenue system to replace the income tax, aligning with his longstanding support for tariffs to protect domestic industries. Now, this approach, which would significantly alter over a century of economic policy, first of all, he can't just do it. It would require Congress. Let's not everybody go crazy here. But one of the key factors is that the current tax rates are about to expire, which means not just as Biden proposed, he was only going to tax those making over $400,000 a year, but would affect all of us, especially middle class, because the tax percentages are going to jump, say, from if you were 25% to 28%. So these are part of the income tax rollbacks that were initiated under Trump's first administration. So that's one of the things he's talking about. But he is talking about a major outside of the box shakeup. And it will impact, not potentially impact, it would impact people's pockets, because if we do an all across board tariff, like he is stating, 10% tariffs on all imports, and specifically 60% on all Chinese goods. And let's face it, we Americans, we are addicted to cheap stuff, and the cheap stuff comes from China. Not saying that's not bad, just saying it's cheaper. And that will have a potential of raising prices more so than what we are already seeing in our grocery stores, in our stores relatively, and also for the price of construction materials, things of that nature. Former president's schedule also features a meeting with the Business Roundtable, which includes executives from major financial institutions like JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Citigroup, and Wells Fargo. And despite past public spats with JP Morgan's Jamie Dimon, Trump and these business leaders shared common ground on maintaining or lowering the corporate tax rate set in the 2017 tax law. However, Trump's call for those higher tariffs, particularly the universal one, remains a contentious issue. Again, because it would raise significantly the price of goods and building supplies and tires and everything else. Again, if you really want to impact the Chinese economic wheelhouse, we're going to have to start looking at divesting ourselves of the addiction of cheap goods. And to round this up, after these key bankers, Trump will be visiting House Republicans or the Senate Republicans that again is rallying around him. So he will be attending meetings and at the National Republican Senatorial Committees. And this session was expected to include potential vice presidential candidates such as Senators J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, which is highly doubtful. One, because Marco is from Florida. Again, is the same constitutional issue when people were doing the rumors of Trump DeSantis ticket. You can't have a state can't endorse both a president and vice president from the same state. This was the issue back in the George W. Bush Cheney ticket, whereas Cheney moved from Texas, or moved his primary residence from Texas to another state in order to be able to be on the ticket. But I digress. Tim Scott and Representative Byron Donalds, another representative from Florida, along with Trump's loyal ally, Representative Elise Stefanik. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, despite his numerous past conflicts with Trump, confirmed his attendance, highlighting the consolidation of GOP support around the former president. However, notable absences included Senators Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, who have been critical of Trump and voted to convict him in his impeachment trial. And let's face it, as we have all seen from his truth tweets, or whatever he calls them, and his explicit statements out on the road and in the news, anybody who votes against him is a traitor against Trump. One of the bigger issues, again, with Trump. It's all about Trump. It's all about his, what some would say, narcissistic values. And if you voted against him, if you're against him, you are opposed to him. Despite the fact that these very type of senators are the moderates, and those are the ones that he needs to appeal to most. But Trump's return to Capitol Hill is not all parades and balloons and fireworks. There is severe criticism from Democrats, including former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who condemned his presence as a continuation of his attempt to undermine democracy. Let me focus on that real quick. To undermine democracy, his presence in the Capitol, our nation's capital, that belongs to all people, regardless if you're convicted, not convicted, or whatever. And on top of that, to undermine democracy. Let's see. The presumptive candidate of the Republican Party for president is undermining democracy because he's meeting with Republican leaders. Again, common sense, please. And again, I will say it, I rest a lot of this at the feet of Nancy Pelosi. Our divisiveness, the way that our congressional members have become so divisive and so partisan, really spring-formed, if not was epitomized by Nancy Pelosi. But despite such opposition, many Republicans have rallied behind Trump, reflecting his enduring influence with the party. Even those who previously opposed him, like Senator Bill Cassidy, acknowledging the reality of Trump's dominance in the GOP, driven by a strong showing in national and state polls against President Biden. This visit underscores Trump's strategic efforts to consolidate power and prepare for the 2024 presidential run, setting the stage for a significant political battles ahead. The bottom line is let's just face it, for the Republican leadership, it's either you're going to back the horse that we have or you're going to go rogue. And at this point, the Republican leadership are all trying to, tie all their loose ends, and whether it's a loose coalition or not, they're backing their horse. And that's the only way if they wish to defeat Biden in this current election cycle. Now let's talk about troubles with Biden. Once again, President Biden has severely low approval ratings. People are still in his own party questioning his ability to even govern, to lead, not much less now, as far as 4 years from now. But one thing is very peculiar is that Americans for Prosperity Action, a conservative group aiming to help Republicans regain control of the Senate, because remember, even though everything seems to be about the presidential elections, there's congressional elections, there's the House of Representatives, there's senatorial elections on the line. Majority control of Congress, an equal branch of the government. And for those of you, hello, AOC, who may need a reminder, our government is made up of 3 equal branches: the executive, which is the president, congressional, legislative, and our judiciary. And the Democratic congressional and senatorial candidates are seeing much better favorability in polls in key states such as Ohio, such as Wisconsin. And then while these key Senate races hold negative views of President Biden, so their voters are finding President Biden to be objectionable, they're viewing their Democratic senators favorably. And this is a scenario that mirrors the warning signs from the 2022 midterms, because remember, everybody in 22 was like, oh, this is going to be a red tsunami, it's going to be a red wave. It was a trickle. It literally was a couple of drops. And that's because so many underestimated the likability of the Democratic senatorial candidates, many of them who are just going up for re-election, but also that the senatorial candidates and the representative candidates have been actually smart in pulling away from the Biden administration's key political points. So they're emphasizing around the kitchen table issues and distancing themselves from the Biden administration. So as we follow these key election cycles, as we're seeing in especially those key states that presumptively could decide who wins the presidential election, those congressional members, the ones that are the incumbents, the sitting senators, the sitting representatives, are having a higher approval rating than the current Democratic president. However, one of the key points for this action committee was that the Republicans need not be complacent like they were in 2022, that anybody who is running against these incumbents especially need to get their name out there. They need to get the true issues that are affecting the people that they're asking for their votes, which is similar to what the presidential candidate should be doing. I'm going to take a quick break, and then we are going to go back into some historic aspects of our judiciary. Tune right in right after this commercial break. We have witnessed historic convictions, and now the bigger question is, what is the impact on our third branch of the government, the judiciary? Hunter Biden and Trump convictions, it's justice at a crossroads. Former President Donald J. Trump and his allies have consistently claimed that Democrats have weaponized the judicial system, a narrative that has gained traction following Trump's conviction on 34 felony counts related to his hush money case. This accusation, however, is complicated by the fact that President Biden has allowed the Justice Department to continue investigating his own son, Hunter Biden. Now, wait a minute, isn't that an oxymoron? He allowed the Justice Department to continue investigating his son. Yeah, let's rewind. Hunter Biden is now made history. He is the first child of a sitting president to be convicted of crimes. And he has been convicted on the gun charges by a federal jury of his peers, 6 women, 6 men, who only deliberated after 3 hours to find him guilty on all charges, much to the surprise of not only the Biden family, but also to many of the legal experts who and some Republicans who were hoping or guessing that there would be a nullification by jury. I guess maybe Hunter Biden isn't as popular in Delaware as people think. But let's face it, Trump, Hunter, if they were Jane Doe, Joe Blow, anybody else, these people would never have been brought up on these charges at all. Let's remember that the Trump trial or convictions were based on raising misdemeanor business record allegations or charges that were barred by statute of limitations to felony by pinning it to an underlying felony, which no one knows what that underlying felony is. So many issues. Hunter Biden's criminal prosecution, well, if you recall, just a year ago, there was going to be a sweetheart deal where Hunter was going to get a smack on the wrist for lying on his application, and it was to include any potential new charges for tax evasion and things like that would not be prosecuted. And the judge was at that time said, time out. Are you telling me you're going to do a pretrial diversion program for any future crimes that he may have committed that are not even known or future indictments? So when that blew up, that sweetheart deal, and it was a sweetheart deal, nobody in their right mind would have gotten that. Wesley Snipes spent how many years in federal prison for tax evasion? Talk to him. It's a real thing. But despite these convictions of Hunter Biden, Republicans still are unsatisfied, continuing to argue that the criminal justice system is being used as a partisan tool. And nonetheless, these juries in both Trump's and Hunter Biden's cases appear to have taken their duties seriously, weighing the evidence and delivering convictions based on the facts presented and the instructions given by the judges. This suggests that a justice system functioned as intended. Whether there is impartiality, that's the bigger question, especially in the case of the Trump case, because we had an attorney general, Bragg, who campaigned on the fact that he was going to bring Trump down. We have a judge that may have been compromised. We still don't know what the underlying felonies were that attached to these misdemeanors to elevate them to the felony. And by the way, let's not talk about the scores of changes in laws that were specifically to go after Donald Trump. So is there a two-tier system? Yes, in my opinion, there has been. The only thing that has been adjusted correctly is that after that sweetheart deal was blown up by the judge questioning the ethical bounds of those prosecutors going, so you mean to you're bringing on this deal for any future potential charges. This was brought. Also, some are arguing that Hunter is basically the fall guy, that by him being convicted, this shows that, Biden is now above, not really playing the judicial card or, weaponizing the judicial system, which is very hard to swallow considering all that has been occurring between the DOJ and not only on the federal level, but the administration being actively involved in state level as well. And then you have the third in charge of the Department of Justice, U.S. Attorney's Office, stepping down, demoting himself to go try Trump. Anyway, Hunter Biden, he is expected to appeal this, as everybody's known. He will be being sentenced. I don't believe the sentencing has been scheduled yet, but he is looking at a maximum of 25 years. However, the reality is he's never been convicted prior to this, so the sentencing guidelines will have to come into effect. He is facing more felony charges for income tax fraud and evasion that is based out in California, which is to begin in September. President Biden, expressing his personal support for his son, has emphasized he is respecting the judicial process, and he has indicated he would not interfere or offer pardon, but we shall see. Right now, as until the election is held in November, Biden's going to say he's not interfering. However, Vegas odds are that daddy is going to come and save his boy once more. And my heart does go out to Hunter, because this was when he was actively in his addiction. This application, these gun churches, and that trial, it was a soap opera beyond soap opera with Jerry Springer-esque aspects. But it does say one thing, is that neither one of these two would have been prosecuted if they were anyone else. But let's look into the takeaways from Hunter Biden's federal conviction. So Hunter Biden, the sole surviving son of President Biden, was convicted of 3 felonies for lying about his drug use when purchasing a firearm in 2018. His lawyers contended that there was no evidence of drug use on the day of the purchase, but the jury, having heard about Biden's severe addiction issues, did convict him. And let's face it, the use of his own book, Hunter's own book, autobiography, came into play. The verdict adds to the ongoing scrutiny and debate of the intersection of politics and the judicial system, particularly in light of former Trump's recent convictions and also his continuing legal woes. The trial, held amidst a charged political atmosphere, underscores the Biden family's longstanding struggles. Testimonies from former romantic partners and Biden's daughter painted a picture of his tumultuous life during his addiction. Despite the emotional testimonies, the conviction stands. Hunter Biden expressed his disappointment, but thanked his family for their support. He broke the law. Would it have been brought? Who knows? He broke it. And let's face it, his ex-wife's testimony, Bo's widow, who was also an ex-girlfriend of Hunter, who became addicted to, I think it was crack or heroin or whatever by Hunter, all testified as to grabbing the gun and throwing it onto the dumpster. So there was a lot of just family drama in this. So now, looking forward, Hunter still faces a separate and potentially more severe trial in September for tax-related offenses. This upcoming trial could lead to a harsher sentence due to the recent felony convictions, with federal guidelines considering past convictions and sentencing decisions. Special counsel David C. Weiss emphasized that the prosecution was about ensuring no one is above the law. Remember, this is a quote, which I wonder if President Biden kind of regrets saying this. When responding to the conviction of Donald J. Trump by the New York jury, President Biden said, no one is above the law. Well, the federal prosecutors jumped on that saying, and were saying that to the jury, that no one was above the law, not even the son of a sitting president. Well, Hunter, unfortunately, no one being above the law bit you on the ass, because you were not above the law. He has gotten away with a lot. Let's also relate that there were other tax offenses that, because of the statute of limitations running and the fact that the DOJ did not want to pursue, or were kind of like hemming and hawing on what to do with these, they allowed, and they were trying to push things out further to allow all of the tax fraud, tax evasion, statute of limitations to run. But it is severe. Now, on another side of the judicial system is the United States Supreme Court. So we had, you got to love these, the Democrats, they were trying to undercut the ability of the third judicial branch, the third branch of the government, to be effectively independent. Senate Republicans blocked a Democratic effort to pass Supreme Court ethics and transparency legislation in response to revelations about justices receiving unreported gifts and engaging in other ethically questionable activities. While the outcome was expected, Senate Democrats aimed to highlight their commitment to addressing the ethical issues at the court, despite their limited power due to the narrow Senate divide and strong Republican resistance, and by the fact that it's unconstitutional. But hey, just throw away everything our founders did. I mean, these men that were our founders, that created this Constitution, that created our Declaration of Independence, that were the foundation of this great country, had the foresight to predict what may happen centuries ahead. Stop the power grab. But of course, that's all what the Democratic Party is. And that's what's the problem. That's what the problem on both sides of the party, the RNC, the DNC, it's a power grab. So we're going to go further into what the Supreme Court has been doing this past year, as it's about to tie up and end its year of decisions, and come right back after this commercial break. I get a little fired up when it comes to the judicial system. So yes, that was defeated. And honestly, this was more of a blustering show of force, like, oh, we need ethical constraints because they want to ding two of the more conservative or the most conservative justices on the Supreme Court. But bottom line is, folks, the reason why we have three independent but equal branches of government is so that there are those checks and balances. And for representatives and senators to call out that there needs to be control over our Supreme Court, our United States Supreme Court, is an absolute infringement on what everything our government is about. And as like Justice Scalia said, one of our greatest aspects of the United States is not our Constitution, it's not the right to free speech, but it's the fact that we do have these three equal branches of government that are the checks and balances. But also, even more importantly, we have a Congress that has a separate House and Senate to also be a checks and balances. And when you have power grabs by this fringe groups or by these both Republican and Democratic parties that are like, to hell with the little person, to hell with what is right, to hell with what is common sense, we want more power, we want more power, we get nothing. So this is when common sense is in play, and this is when I believe in the people of the United States, those 70% of us that are just like, we just want you to do what your job says. And speaking of which, the United States Supreme Court unanimously rejected an abortion bill challenge. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled unanimously, all agreed to reject an attempt by an anti-abortion groups and doctors to restrict access to the abortion pill, mifepristone. This decision is a significant victory for President Joe Biden's administration, which has been working to maintain broad access to the drug. The justices, honestly, why is this a President Biden's administration? Anyway, it's what was right. The doctors didn't have standing. This wasn't a recall of the abortion issues or going back into trying to reinstate Roe v. Wade. This is literally some doctors tried to bring in a lawsuit to ban the abortion bill, filing a lawsuit against the FDA, saying that they may potentially have to deal with a woman who has a potential side effect to the abortion pill. They were found not to have standing. And the justices followed the rule of law. So the justices overturned a lower court's decision that aimed to roll back FDA measures from 2016 and 2021 that eased the prescribing and distribution process of this abortion pill. The plaintiffs, who lacked the necessary legal standing, had challenged FDA actions that allowed medication abortions up to 10 weeks of pregnancy and permitted the drug to be mailed without the in-person clinician visit. Their attempt to reverse the FDA's 2000 approval of this particular pill was previously dismissed by a lower court. The ruling underscored that a desire to restrict drug access does not establish standing to sue under the Constitution. This case is part of a broader and ongoing battle over the abortion rights in the U.S. Following the Supreme Court's epic decision of 2022 overturning Roe v. Wade, abortion access has been significantly restricted in 14 states. And let's remember this was because of Dobbs. Dodds forced the issue to go back to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court basically stated that there is not a federal right to there's not a constitutional right to an abortion. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say it, and it's not a federal issue. This is supposed to be dealt with by state by state by state. So hence why we have some states like Texas that it did an all-out ban, and other states like California that are allowing abortion to go all the way up to full term. And again, why was Dodds necessary? Was because the extremists started pushing a rhetoric that was ridiculous, because the bottom line is if everything was kosher, if everybody stayed still, we would probably still have Roe on the book. But instead it was because everybody was starting to argue that, oh, you can abort a child the day before you're about to deliver. It's ridiculous, right? But this is what happens when you have extreme viewpoints taking on extreme viewpoints. So you got one and two, and unfortunately we have, I don't even call them the Christian Coalition. You have this very conservative Southern Baptist Pentecostal type of group that are trying to enforce their mores on the rest of us. And this is an issue that was brought back to the states. However, this decision, though, is critical because it does allow the continuation of the abortion pill, which is, by the way, the most readily available drug and is one that's used. Even though abortions, since the overturning Roe v. Wade, abortions have been on the rise. Now, there's some other notable Supreme Court rulings and hearings of 2024. So the U.S. Supreme Court is concluding its term marked by significant cases covering a wide range of contentious issues. Among the key rulings, in Trump versus Anderson, the court unanimously restored former President Donald Trump's eligibility for the ballot in Colorado, rejecting state attempts to disqualify candidates based on engagement in rebellion or insurrection, which, by the way, has yet to be found to be an insurrection or a rebellion. As if it were, going in with a guy that has a buffalo headgear on and no weapons would not be a rebellion. We have seen countries that have had true insurrections. This was a riot that went way wrong. While all justices agreed on the outcome, four expressed concern over limiting enforcement of constitutional clauses, barring such individuals from holding office. The bottom line is that one state cannot determine the outcome of a presidential election for the nation. And that's what was happening. And again, it was politicized. It was, oh, we're going to teach Trump a lesson. And I mean, honestly, I get it. The guy is a narcissistic, egotistic, bombastic person. But all this hate, I'm still trying to figure it out. Trump v. U.S. addresses whether a former president enjoys immunity from prosecution for actions during office, specifically allegations related to the 2020 election. The court's deliberations and when they were hearing the case and arguments before the court suggested a nuanced approach, potentially granting some protection to ex-presidents, but not fully endorsing Trump's expansive immunity claims. However, this is still an outstanding decision. We are still awaiting that decision to come down the pipeline. Fisher versus U.S. examines the prosecution of participants in the January 6th Capitol riot under obstruction charges. The case questions the applicability of a statute designed for corporate governance to rioters' actions during a congressional proceeding, reflecting ongoing legal battles stemming from the events of that day. Again, I'm still curious, though, as all these Jan 6 rioters are being prosecuted, how about all of the protesters, pro-Palestinian protesters that were running into these House of Representatives or senatorial things and trying to stop their procedures? The next big case, FDA versus Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine, concerns the FDA's authority to expand access to the abortion pill mifepristone, which, as we discussed, it goes straight into this very conservative, very anti-abortion extremist viewpoints trying to further prevent women from having a choice, which based on Dodd's, each state has the individual choice. But thankfully that was shot down, just for the lack of standing, but also I don't see why that, the whole point of the abortion pill was so that you didn't have an extreme case, and it was before very much before viability. Some other interesting cases. Moyle v. U.S. tackling the conflict between federal law mandating emergency care and state abortion restrictions, focusing on Idaho's ban and whether hospitals must provide abortions in emergency situations despite state prohibition. Now, this is the issue with these flat out bans against abortion, because there are emergency circumstances that require a woman, even if she does, and we're not saying that she wants the abortion. This is a woman that really wants the pregnancy, is having severe complications and requires an emergency DNC, or has opted after excruciating decision to go with a DNC. Again, this is where government does not have any place in a person's personal choice. I don't care. It's the truth. We have yet to see a government to go after the men and say, you can't have a vasectomy. Sorry, you must keep those things. Or how about this? Men require all reproducing men to have vasectomies to prevent unwanted pregnancies. And when there is a wanted pregnancy, then we can deal with that. I mean, are we talking about, craziness? That is what this is. This is an extremely touchy subject. I understand that. And it is even more so complicated by the fact that people are interjecting their moral outrage or extreme views on this subject that has brought it. I mean, I, for one, really felt that when I was in law school and it was the 30th anniversary of Roe, that we were going to see this finally kind of edging out. This was commonplace, but no, that's not the case. I mean, even here in Florida, they had this 6-week abortion ban that looks like it's going to be upheld. So now we, the Floridians, will be looking at the November ballot, a constitutional amendment that allow for the constitutional right to an abortion up to the second trimester, 12, and that's with some medical backing. Needless to say, the U.S. Supreme Court has been busy this year, and we've had some major decisions. And I just want to share something. All we hear about in the news, to include myself, are the big cases, the important cases that the U.S. Supreme Court is dealing with, like the, open borders, Texas's right to bar the border, things like that. But the truth is despite that, you have Sotomayor saying that she cries in her office when they can't come down, come to decisions, or because of the decisions. Stop the drama. 85 to 90% of cases that do go before the U.S. Supreme Court are unanimous, are per curiam. They're just like, yeah, we're in all agreement. And then you have maybe some, split 7-3, 8-2, things like that. But the one thing is for certain, it's very rare when you have a complete down the line conservative versus liberal. We have to get our judicial system, maybe our criminal justice system, back on level. But we are very lucky because we are fortunate that we do have these three branches that depend on their independence, but also that we give the respect that those offices hold. And let's also remember these justices, whether on the U.S. Supreme Court, the federal benches, or on the state level, they are people. They have a right to their opinions. They have a right to their lives. And just because their spouses are involved in something does not necessarily make a reflection on them, or the fact that they will not be able to uphold their oaths, to uphold that Constitution. I'm going to take a quick break, and then we're on to international news that are impacting the political scheme of world order. Well, unlike the United States in 2022, where there was no wave, there was a conservative wave in the European elections, and it has been throughout. So the European Union had their elections, and Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has recently celebrated a significant political victory following her party's strong performance in the European Parliament elections. The success of her far-right Brothers of Italy party has catapulted Meloni into a prominent role on the European stage, coinciding with Italy hosting the G7 summit, which is undergoing right now. Donning a distinctive pink pantsuit, Meloni welcomed world leaders with confidence, positioning herself as Italy's strongest leader in recent memory. Meloni's influence extends beyond ceremonial gestures. She has actively shaped policy discussions at the G7, notably pushing to exclude direct references to abortion and reproductive rights from the summer's communique. While facing opposition from the US, France, and others, Meloni managed a partial victory as the final document reaffirmed support for women's reproductive rights, albeit without specific mentions of abortion. Her political ascendancy has also elevated Italy's role in European affairs. Where she is advocating for tougher immigration policies and challenges costly climate initiatives, Meloni has navigated Italy's volatile political landscape adeptly, particularly in contrast to her former ally, Matteo Salvini, whose party suffered a significant setback in the elections. Despite her successes, critics highlight concerns over Meloni's conservative agenda, which includes restricting LGBTQ plus rights and endorsing legislation that could curtail reproductive freedoms. Now, Meloni is a staunch Catholic, so much of her viewpoints are based on her Catholicism. While she has avoided overt attacks on democratic institutions, her administration's actions against journalists and social rights have raised alarms about the erosion of civil liberties under her leadership. Internationally, Meloni has forged alliances while avoiding the isolation faced by other far-right leaders like Hungary's Viktor Orban. Her alignment with Western positions on Russia and cooperation with figures like President Biden underscore her pragmatic approach to foreign policy, enhancing her credibility on the global stage. Looking forward, Meloni's influence could reshape European politics, particularly in collaboration with other conservative leaders like Ursula von der Leyen and Marine Le Pen. However, her policies continue to polarize opinions within Italy and across Europe. But one of the things, well, her biggest opponent is Prime Minister Macron of France, who has had a devastating election results in his parliament where the right wing overwhelmed his party, and he is now calling for new elections in the parliament, I guess, for parliament heads. But the bottom line is that the European people who ironically have the power, they still have the power with their vote, have changed the course because said enough is enough with this woke push by this fringe. Enough is enough with this open borders where they're seeing towns like the little town of Italy of 9,000 peoples where they're being overrun by 20s and 30-year-old very capable men, and rape and sexual assault and violent crimes have been on an uprise. So this is something that is indicative, because regardless of what some people would say, the globalist regime, the World Health Organization, the progressives that want only a few to be in charge and the rest of us to be little lemmings and being told what to do, where we can live and how we can live, because that is basically what we're going to. Okay, Handmaid's case, whatever you want to call it. But one thing is for certain, the people have spoken, and it is uprooting a longstanding progressive or liberal power within the European Union, within the European countries, to that we're going now. And one of the big agreements coming out of this G7 summit is Ukraine funding. At the summit of the Group of Seven, the G7, major advanced economies held in southern Italy, President Biden and European leaders unveiled plans to provide Ukraine with a substantial financial package amounting up to $50 billion. This aid is to be financed through the interest generated from approximately $300 billion in frozen Russian assets held primarily in Europe, a response to Russia's ongoing invasion of Ukraine. This I can get behind. The details of how this finance will be structured and managed still need to be finalized, but the leaders aim to start dispersing the funds by the end of the year. This is huge, $50 billion from the interest that is gained from seized, frozen assets by the Russian oligarchs. In addition to this financial support, Biden and Ukrainian President Zelensky are expected to announce a bilateral security agreement. This agreement seeks to establish a long-term commitment from the United States to provide military aid to Ukraine aimed at bolstering its defenses against Russian aggression. However, the agreement does not include commitments regarding Ukraine's bid to join NATO and is not legally binding beyond the current administration. The summit's discussions underscored the G7's unified stance in supporting Ukraine despite internal political divisions within the US and Europe. The leaders aim to send a clear message of solidarity and resolve in countering Russian military actions, which have intensified in recent months, including attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure and an expanded ground offensive. However, challenges remain in finalizing the financing plan, particularly concerning the technical details and risk-sharing arrangements between the US and European capitals. European officials favor channeling the funds through existing EU programs, with a focus on military aid and potential contracts for European companies involved in Ukraine's reconstruction efforts. Meanwhile, the U.S. has advocated for a World Bank-managed special purpose vehicle to administer the loan, emphasizing the need for guarantees to mitigate financial risk if Russia asset profits are disrupted due to geopolitical reasons within Europe, such as potential vetoes by Hungary. Despite these complexities, the summit outcome represents a significant commitment by the Western allies to bolster Ukraine's resilience against Russian aggression, with navigating diplomatic and logistical challenges to ensure effective implementation of the financial and security agreement. Now on to the other war, the Israeli-Hamas war, Gaza's frustration with Hamas. Well, for the continuation of the war that was initiated by Hamas's gruesome attack on October 7th, I will never stop reminding everyone that this was initiated by Hamas's gruesome, brutal mutilation of innocents on October 7th. The Gazans are growing frustrated with the lack of progress in ceasefire talks, leading to a decline in support for Hamas. Months of negotiations involving Israel, Hamas, and mediators from the US, Egypt, and Qatar have failed to produce an agreement to end the fighting and free Israeli hostages. This very much is because Hamas keeps throwing in more and more wants. And their biggest thing is that Israel pay for the reconstruction, Israel leave Gaza, and oh, by the way, Hamas will stay in control. But no, the whole point, Israel has always said Hamas will not be in control of Gaza, to the point that even the Gazans' approval of Hamas has dropped from 52% to 46% in the past 3 months because they are starving. So it's time for these world leaders to get together and basically call out the Arab nations to say, get this group out of Gaza. If we want peace in the Middle East, we need to get rid of this terrorist organization that has taken control of these poor people in the Gaza Strip, and these people who are starving. But they are, you know what, their plights were already horrible even before the war started, because Hamas has been taking every aid, taking all the money that has been pumped in by the US, by the UN into Gaza for their military means. And while the leadership of Hamas sits comfortably in their penthouse suites of the Ritz in Qatar, looking on TV of what's happening in Gaza, the real people who are suffering are the families in Gaza. Enough is enough. When are we going to get back to some common sense? You do not reward the terrorists. Enough said. I am Alina Gonzalez Dockery. I hope you enjoyed the show. I am thrilled to be with you once again this Friday evening. I look forward to seeing you next week, when we will have more news and more opinions on the political landscape that affects you and I at home. I'm wishing you a good night and a wonderful weekend.
This has been a Now Media Networks feature presentation. All rights reserved.